Welcome to Sleepless Dark Theories. Tonight, we return to a day the world will never forget, but perhaps never fully understood. September 11th, 2001. Skies were clear, the world was watching, and in 102 minutes, history changed forever. But beneath the smoke and steel lie questions left unanswered. Buildings that fell with impossible precision, warnings ignored, evidence sealed, timelines that fracture under scrutiny. Was it the act of 19 men, or the unveiling of something deeper, more deliberate? The mystery of a third tower no one talks about, missing pages, hidden footage and redacted truths, military drills, delays and coincidences stacked too neatly, every alarm that didn't ring, every camera that didn't record, adds another shadow to the story. So take a deep breath, turn down the noise, and let the silence lead you. Before we begin, take a breath and dim the noise. If you find comfort in the quiet spaces between the facts, tap like. And if you're ready to follow the shadows wherever they lead, subscribe and join the silent investigation. Now, let's begin. The morning that changed everything. The morning of September 11th, 2001, began like any other in New York City, with commuters filling the streets and the World Trade Center's Twin Towers standing tall against a clear blue sky. At 8:46 a.m., that sense of normalcy was shattered. American Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 767 on its way from Boston to Los Angeles, crashed into the North Tower between the 93rd and 99th floors at nearly 470 miles per hour. All 92 people aboard died instantly, along with many inside the building. The empty 10,000 gallons of jet fuel ignited, a smaller fraction of its full 76,000-pound fuel load, creating a fireball that erupted outward and upward, instantly setting multiple floors ablaze. The impact severed all three emergency stairwells, cutting off escape routes for hundreds trapped above, and left those inside facing impossible choices in the chaos. Outside, confusion and fear began to take hold. People on the streets looked up to see smoke and debris pouring from the North Tower. At first, many assumed a tragic accident had occurred, perhaps a mechanical failure or pilot error. Sirens echoed through lower Manhattan as the New York City Fire Department and Port Authority Police Department mobilized. Battalion Chief Joseph Pfeiffer, commanding from 14 blocks north, witnessed the crash and immediately ordered a second alarm, escalating to a third alarm within minutes. Firefighters, police, and emergency medical crews rushed to the site, their understanding shaped by the belief that they were responding to a catastrophic but isolated event. That belief didn't last long. At 9:03 a.m., just 17 minutes after the first strike, United Airlines Flight 175, another Boeing 767, also bound for Los Angeles, appeared in the sky and crashed into the South Tower between the 77th and 85th floors. The collision killed all 65 people on board and an unknown number inside. The impact severed elevator cables and 2 out of 3 stairwells, trapping many above the flames. This time, millions witnessed the event live on television. The second plane erased any doubt. This was a coordinated attack. As smoke poured from both towers, the city's sense of shock deepened into alarm. News anchors struggled to make sense of the unfolding disaster. People across the country and the world watched as the disaster played out in real time. Airports nationwide went on alert. The Federal Aviation Administration quickly banned all takeoffs for flights heading to or through New York airspace. Air traffic controllers issued warnings, and fighter jets were dispatched, but the scale and coordination of the attacks left officials scrambling to keep up. On the ground, the response intensified. First responders hurried into the buildings, climbing stairwells toward the upper floors, not knowing what they would find. Civilians on the streets watched in disbelief, some fleeing from falling debris, others running toward the towers to help. The fires raged, fed by thousands of gallons of jet fuel, and the upper floors became increasingly uninhabitable. For those trapped above the impact zones, escape was impossible. Some made desperate attempts to signal for help, while others faced choices no one should have to make. At 9:59 a.m., 56 minutes after impact, the South Tower collapsed. The building, once a symbol of strength and modern engineering, folded in on itself in a matter of seconds. 90 floors seemed to disappear, floor by floor, in a violent cascade of steel and dust. The collapse sent a massive plume of debris and ash through the streets, blanketing lower Manhattan and leaving survivors and onlookers stunned. The speed and completeness of the collapse left little time for those inside to react. The destruction claimed the lives of many first responders and civilians who had been trying to escape or help others. The North Tower remained standing for another 29 minutes. At 10:28 a.m., it too collapsed, mirroring the fall of its twin. The building's floors pancaked down onto each other, sending another cloud of dust and debris into the sky. The collapse destroyed the Marriott Hotel at the base of the towers and damaged nearby buildings, including 7 World Trade Center. In the North Tower, 16 people were rescued from the wreckage, a small moment of hope amid overwhelming loss. Official reports later concluded fires weakened steel supports, leading to a rapid, progressive collapse. The immediate aftermath was marked by confusion and heartbreak. First responders continued to search for survivors, even as the scale of the destruction became clear. The streets were coated in ash and debris, and the skyline was changed forever. Emergency workers dug through the rubble, driven by duty and disbelief at what had happened. The city, and the world, struggled to process the enormity of the loss. As the hours passed, the outline of the plot behind the attacks began to emerge. Authorities stated that the events were part of a coordinated act of terror orchestrated by Al-Qaeda. Hijackers had taken control of 4 commercial airliners, targeting symbols of American power. The attacks on the World Trade Center were the most visible and devastating, but questions began to surface almost immediately. Survivors, witnesses, and viewers at home wondered how such tall, steel-framed buildings could fall so quickly and so completely. Eyewitnesses described hearing explosions before the towers fell, a detail that would be discussed and debated for years. As the hours passed, the outline of the plot behind the attacks began to emerge. Authorities stated that the events were part of a coordinated act of terror orchestrated by Al-Qaeda. Hijackers had taken control of 4 commercial airliners, targeting symbols of American power. The attacks on the World Trade Center were the most visible and devastating, but questions began to surface almost immediately. Survivors, witnesses, and viewers at home wondered how such tall, steel-framed buildings could fall so quickly and so completely. Eyewitnesses described hearing explosions before the towers fell, a detail that would be discussed and debated for years. Yet, as the dust settled, many who lived through it wondered, how could 2 record-breaking skyscrapers vanish so cleanly? The images of the towers collapsing in near-perfect vertical lines, the rapid speed of the fall, and the uniformity of the destruction all fueled questions that would linger long after the smoke had cleared. Some pointed to the unique tubular design of the towers, which allowed the exterior columns to bear much of the load. as a possible explanation for the way they fell. Others remained unconvinced, troubled by the apparent symmetry and speed of the collapse. In the days that followed, the conversation shifted from shock and mourning to analysis and debate. Engineers, architects, and investigators pored over video footage, eyewitness accounts, and structural data. The official narrative was reinforced by detailed reports, but the doubts persisted. The world had witnessed something unprecedented, and for many, the explanations offered left gaps that felt too wide to fill. The morning of September 11th left a mark not only on the physical landscape of New York City, but also on the collective consciousness. The events of those few hours reshaped lives, policies, and beliefs. Even as the city began to recover, the questions about how and why the towers fell continued to echo in conversations, documentaries, and late-night debates. As we look back on that morning, the memory of those moments invites reflection. The facts are clear, yet the details, especially the way the towers fell, continue to raise questions. With so much at stake and so many perspectives to consider, the search for understanding remains ongoing. The Twin Towers, engineering anomalies or controlled demolition. Questions about the collapse of the Twin Towers have drawn attention for years, with many still wondering whether what happened was the result of engineering failure or something more intentional. The official story, supported by major investigations, is that the building's destruction began with the impact of the planes. When the aircraft struck, they caused immediate and severe structural damage to the towers. The jet fuel on board ignited, setting off fires that quickly spread across multiple floors. These fires grew as they consumed office contents, paper, furniture, and other flammable materials, raising temperatures high enough to weaken the steel columns that held the buildings upright. According to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, steel doesn't have to melt to lose its strength. It begins to soften at around 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit, and by 1,800 degrees, it has lost about 90% of its load-bearing capacity. The fires, fed by thousands of gallons of jet fuel and office materials, reached these critical temperatures, leading to a progressive collapse. The upper floors fell onto those below, setting off a chain reaction that brought the towers down in less than 15 seconds. The design of the Twin Towers played a significant role in how they failed. Unlike most skyscrapers, the World Trade Center towers featured a tube-like structure, with the exterior columns bearing much of the load. This design made the towers both strong and flexible, but it also meant that once the exterior columns were compromised, the entire building became vulnerable. When the fires weakened the steel and the floors began to sag, the load shifted and the weakened supports could no longer hold the immense weight above. The collapse began at the impact zones and rapidly progressed downward floor by floor as each level was overwhelmed by the mass above it. Still, for many, the official explanation leaves room for doubt. The symmetry and speed of the collapses, with both towers falling almost straight down into their own footprints, have led some to suspect that explosives were involved. Controlled demolition is a process used to bring down buildings safely and efficiently, often leaving them to fall in on themselves to minimize damage to surrounding structures. The Twin Towers' near vertical descent and the rapid pace of their collapse, each in about 10 seconds, are often cited by proponents of the demolition theory as evidence that something more than fire and structural damage was at play. Eyewitness accounts add another layer to the debate. Several first responders and survivors described hearing loud, isolated explosions before and during the collapses. These reports include sharp bangs or booms, sometimes coming from floors far below where the plane struck. Some of these accounts were captured in interviews and audio recordings from the day. The official narrative suggests these sounds were likely caused by failing structural elements, beams snapping, or floors giving way under pressure. However, critics argue that the timing and nature of these noises are more consistent with the use of explosives. The question of what might have caused such explosions leads to the controversial topic of thermite. Thermite is a chemical mixture that burns at extremely high temperatures and is used in industrial applications to cut through steel. Some researchers and theorists claim that traces of thermite, or a more advanced form known as nanothermite, were found in the dust and debris at ground zero. They point to fine, reddish-grey particles collected from the site that, according to their analysis, match the characteristics of thermitic material. The presence of molten metal beneath the rubble, described by some first responders as molten steel, is also used as evidence. Jet fuel burns at a maximum of around 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, well below the melting point of steel, which is about 2,500 degrees. Critics of the official story suggest that only something like thermite could explain the pools of glowing metal seen weeks after the event. However, many experts dispute these claims, arguing that the molten material could have been aluminum from the planes, mixed with other debris, and that the heat from the fires, combined with smouldering materials, could have produced the observed effects. The speed of the tower's collapse is another point of contention. Both buildings fell at a rate that, to many observers, seemed to approach free fall, about 10 seconds from top to bottom. In theory, if the lower floors were undamaged, they should have provided resistance and slowed the fall. Supporters of the controlled demolition theory argue that the collapse was too fast and too symmetrical to be explained by fire and structural damage alone. Engineers who back the official account, however, point out that once the upper section of a building begins to fall, the force it generates is immense. As each floor gives way, the mass above grows larger and falls faster, crushing the floors below in rapid succession. In this scenario, the collapse would be nearly as fast as free fall, with little time for resistance to build up. Video footage from the day shows bursts of debris, sometimes called squibs, shooting out from the sides of the towers several floors below the collapse zones. Those who believe in the demolition theory say these look like the small controlled explosions seen in building demolitions. The official explanation is that as floors pancaked downward, air and debris were forced out of the building at high speed, creating these visible bursts. Both sides use this footage to support their arguments, but the true cause of these squibs remains debated. Another detail that fuels suspicion is the condition of some steel columns found in the wreckage. Photos taken at ground zero show steel beams cut at sharp angles, which some interpret as evidence of the use of cutting charges, explosives designed to slice through steel. Engineers and cleanup crews, however, say that the collapse and subsequent removal process often left steel broken and jagged, and that some beams were cut during the cleanup itself to make removal easier. The removal of debris from the site happened quickly, with much of the steel shipped off for recycling before it could be thoroughly examined. This decision has been criticised by those who believe more forensic analysis was needed. The rapid cleanup, while necessary for safety and recovery, left some feeling that important evidence was lost. Psychology may also play a role in why demolition theories persist. The sight of two of the world's tallest buildings collapsing so quickly and so completely was shocking and unsettling. For many, the official explanation feels unsatisfying. It's difficult to accept that a combination of fire and impact could bring down such massive structures in such a dramatic way. Theories about explosives and planned demolition offer a sense of order and intent, even if the evidence remains inconclusive. Despite the ongoing debate, most structural engineers and investigators stand by the progressive collapse model. They cite the unique design of the towers, the unprecedented damage from the plane impacts, and the intensity of the fires as the main reasons for the rapid and total collapse. The case, in their view, is closed. Yet, the questions and doubts remain, kept alive by eyewitness accounts, video footage, and the unexplained details that still surface from time to time. The collapse of the Twin Towers is often seen as the defining moment of that day, but it wasn't the only building to fall. Later that afternoon, another skyscraper in the World Trade Center complex, one that wasn't struck by a plane, collapsed in a manner that continues to puzzle experts and laypeople alike. The mystery of Building 7. The story of World Trade Center Building 7 stands apart from the rest of that day's destruction. The building, a 47-story steel-framed skyscraper, fell just after 5 p.m. on September 11, 2001. Unlike the Twin Towers, Building 7 was not hit by an airplane, and it did not contain large amounts of jet fuel. Yet its collapse, captured on video from several angles, showed the structure dropping almost perfectly into its own footprint in about 6.5 seconds. For many, this event became the most puzzling and debated structural failure of September 11th. The official explanation, as detailed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, centers on the fires that burned for hours inside Building 7. These fires were started by debris from the North Tower's collapse. According to the NIST report, the heat weakened a crucial support column, known as Column 79, deep within the building. Once this column failed, the floors above it gave way, which set off a chain reaction that brought down the rest of the structure. The report emphasizes that Building 7's design, while advanced for its time, was not intended to withstand the prolonged, intense heat from uncontrolled office fires, especially after suffering damage from falling debris. NIST's simulations suggest that after the internal supports were compromised, gravity caused the building to collapse in a progressive and rapid sequence. Even so, many who watched the collapse, either in person or later on video, could not shake the impression that the building seemed to fall with the speed and symmetry of a controlled demolition. For about 2.5 seconds during its descent, Building 7's upper floors dropped at what appeared to be free-fall acceleration, as if the structure below offered no resistance at all. This observation is a key reason why the collapse of WTC-7 continues to draw suspicion. Skeptics argue that if fire were the only cause, the fall would have been slower, less even, or partial, as undamaged parts of the building would have resisted the collapse. The symmetry of the event is another point that keeps the debate alive. In most cases of fire-induced structural failure, buildings tend to sag, lean, or collapse unevenly, yet Building 7's fall looked almost perfectly straight down, floor after floor, in a sequence that closely resembles what is seen in planned demolitions. This visual similarity has led some to question whether the building could have been brought down intentionally, using explosives or other means. Eyewitness accounts from the day add more layers to the mystery. Some emergency workers reported that they were warned in advance that Building 7 was likely to collapse. This is unusual, since no modern steel-framed skyscraper had ever before fallen from fire alone. Firefighters reportedly cleared the area around the building in the hours before its collapse, citing signs of structural instability and visible damage. However, the fact that some people seem to anticipate the collapse has led critics to wonder if there was prior knowledge of what would happen. Media coverage from that afternoon also became a point of controversy. One well-known example involves a live BBC broadcast in which the reporter announced that Building 7 had already collapsed, while it was still standing in the background. Some see this as evidence of a scripted event, though others point to the confusion and chaos of the day as a more likely explanation. Regardless, these moments of mixed communication and apparent foreknowledge continue to feed speculation. Another detail that fuels debate is the presence of molten metal in the wreckage of Building 7. Several witnesses described seeing glowing liquid metal in the debris weeks after the collapse. To skeptics, this suggests temperatures higher than what office fires should produce, raising the possibility that another source, such as explosives or a chemical accelerant, was involved. Those who support the official account argue that the molten material may have been aluminum from building contents or equipment, which can appear similar to molten steel, especially in the extreme heat following hours of burning. The scientific discussion around Building 7's collapse has not been limited to official reports. Over 2,000 architects and engineers have called for a new, independent investigation, arguing that the NIST report does not fully explain the building's rapid and symmetrical fall. These critics question the methodology used in the official analysis, especially the computer simulations that form the basis of NIST's conclusions. They point out that the observed collapse, its speed, its uniformity, and the apparent lack of resistance does not match what is typically seen in fire-damaged buildings. One of the most discussed pieces of evidence comes from Larry Silverstein, the leaseholder of the World Trade Center complex. In a 2002 interview, Silverstein said, "We decided to pull Building 7. The word pull is sometimes used in demolition circles to refer to the act of intentionally bringing down a building with explosives. Conspiracy theorists see this as a slip, a sign that the collapse was planned." Silverstein later clarified that he meant pulling firefighters out of the building to avoid further loss of life, but the ambiguity of his statement has kept the debate alive. Theories about why Building 7 might have been brought down intentionally are wide-ranging. Some suggest the building contained sensitive government offices, including the CIA and Secret Service, and that the collapse was meant to destroy important documents. Others argue that the event was staged to reinforce the shock of the attacks and justify the sweeping changes that followed. The lack of consensus on motive is part of what keeps the mystery alive. For many, the real question is not just why the building fell, but how such a complete and rapid collapse could occur under the circumstances described. Theories about why Building 7 might have been brought down intentionally are wide-ranging. Some suggest the building contained sensitive government offices, including the CIA and Secret Service, and that the collapse was meant to destroy important documents. Others argue that the event was staged to reinforce the shock of the attacks and justify the sweeping changes that followed. The lack of consensus on motive is part of what keeps the mystery alive. For many, the real question is not just why the building fell, but how such a complete and rapid collapse could occur under the circumstances described. The official narrative remains firm. Fires, fed by office contents and possibly diesel fuel from backup generators, weakened a key support column, leading to a progressive collapse. NIST's simulations show how the failure of one column could have triggered the destruction of the entire building. Critics, however, argue that these models do not fully match the footage of the actual event, and that the collapse still looks too much like a controlled demolition to be explained by fire alone. Despite years of investigation and debate, questions remain. How could a building collapse so quickly and so evenly from fire when no similar event had ever occurred before? Why did Building 7's fall look so much like a demolition, and why did it happen so late in the day, after the dust from the Twin Towers had already settled? These unanswered questions continue to draw the attention of those who seek a more complete explanation. Building 7's collapse is more than just an engineering puzzle. It has become a symbol of lingering doubt and unresolved questions from that day. Its story is woven into the larger narrative of September 11th, raising issues about transparency, the limits of scientific investigation, and the role of uncertainty in moments of crisis. For some, the official explanation is enough. For others, the mystery endures. Building 7's collapse is more than just an engineering puzzle. It has become a symbol of lingering doubt and unresolved questions from that day. Its story is woven into the larger narrative of September 11th, raising issues about transparency, the limits of scientific investigation, and the role of uncertainty in moments of crisis. For some, the official explanation is enough. For others, the mystery endures. Flight 77 and the Pentagon, a puzzle of evidence. While the collapse of Building 7 raised new questions, another event that morning drew a different kind of scrutiny, one centered not on what fell, but on what, according to some, seemed to be missing. The attack on the Pentagon involving American Airlines Flight 77 remains one of the most debated aspects of September 11th. At 9:37 a.m., the Pentagon's west side was struck by what the official account identifies as Flight 77, a Boeing 757 with 64 people on board. The impact killed everyone on the plane and 125 people inside the Pentagon, hitting a section that had recently been renovated and was less populated than usual. The crash sent thick smoke rising over Washington, D.C., and fire crews rushed to contain the blaze fueled by jet fuel. The destruction was immediate and severe, tearing through offices, collapsing walls, and igniting a fire that burned for hours. The government's narrative describes a hijacked plane departing from Dulles International Airport, turning back over Ohio, and descending sharply toward its target. The final approach was low and fast, with Flight 77 skimming just above the ground before slamming into the Pentagon. Officials later noted that the renovations to the struck section, which included reinforced walls, likely prevented even greater loss of life. Despite the devastation, the timing and location of the impact meant fewer people were inside than usual. Yet, from the earliest moments after the attack, observers began to question the evidence. The size of the impact hole in the Pentagon's facade appeared, to many, smaller than what would be expected from a commercial airliner with a 125-foot wingspan. Photographs taken in the aftermath showed a gash in the building that some described as too narrow and low to fit a Boeing 757. On the lawn outside, there was little visible debris. No large sections of fuselage, no wings, and no engines immediately apparent. This absence of wreckage became a focal point for those who doubted the official story. Skeptics also pointed to the skill required for the attack. The hijacker alleged to have piloted Flight 77, Hani Hanjour, was known for struggling with small aircraft and had been described by flight instructors as a poor pilot. Yet, according to official accounts, he executed a difficult maneuver, a high-speed spiraling descent, leveling off just feet above the ground before striking the Pentagon. For some, this feat seemed unlikely for someone with Hanjour's reported abilities. The limited video evidence added to the uncertainty. The only publicly released footage came from a security camera in the Pentagon parking lot. The frames captured at intervals showed a blur crossing the screen, followed by an explosion. No clear image of a plane could be seen. Other nearby cameras, at a gas station and a hotel, were said to have recorded the event, but their footage was quickly collected by authorities and has not been widely released. This lack of clear video documentation has fueled doubts and speculation, with some wondering why, at one of the most secure buildings in the world, there wasn't more definitive visual proof. Witness accounts from the area offer a mix of perspectives. Some people near the Pentagon described seeing a large plane flying low and fast, its engines roaring as it approached. Drivers on the nearby highway recalled the shock of watching a commercial jetliner descend toward the building. Others, including Pentagon employee April Gallup, later said what struck the building did not look like a plane. These conflicting reports have been cited on both sides of the debate. Alternative theories soon took shape. Some proposed that the Pentagon was not hit by a plane at all, but by a missile or drone. They point to the size of the impact hole, the lack of visible wreckage, and the absence of clear photographs showing plane parts. Others suggest that Flight 77 was diverted elsewhere, and that a different object caused the damage. These ideas have been widely criticized, especially by the families of Flight 77's passengers, who have spoken about their loved ones' final moments and the pain caused by such speculation. The government and investigators have responded to these doubts by pointing to forensic evidence. They note that parts of the plane, including landing gear, engine components, and pieces of the fuselage, were found inside the building. The crash and resulting fire were so intense that much of the plane was destroyed on impact or burned in the hours that followed. The renovated section of the Pentagon was built to withstand explosions, which may have contained the destruction and limited the spread of debris. Some experts explain that at such high speed, over 500 miles per hour, the wings and lighter sections of the plane could have disintegrated or been absorbed into the building, leaving less visible wreckage outside. Investigators also recovered the plane's black box flight recorders from the site, which provided data supporting the official account. DNA analysis identified remains of the passengers and crew, offering further evidence that Flight 77 did, in fact, crash at the Pentagon. The 9/11 Commission and other official reports have maintained that the attack unfolded as described, despite the lingering questions about the physical evidence. Still, the doubts persist. The Pentagon is one of the most secure and monitored buildings in the world, equipped with radar, cameras, and defense systems. Critics have asked why these systems failed to stop or intercept the plane, and why more detailed footage hasn't been made public. Some wonder if there was a breakdown in communication or if warnings were missed or ignored. Others suspect that secrecy and the rapid collection of evidence may have contributed to the sense that something was being concealed. Theories about a missile strike or an inside job continue to circulate, often fueled by the lack of clear images and the unusual circumstances of the crash. Proponents of these theories point to inconsistencies in the official story, while opponents argue that the available evidence, physical debris, eyewitness testimony, and forensic analysis supports the conclusion that Flight 77 hit the Pentagon. The emotional impact of these debates is real, especially for those who lost family members on Flight 77. Many have spoken out against alternative theories, describing the pain caused by suggestions that their loved ones' deaths were faked or covered up. For them, the evidence is personal, and the official story is not just a matter of public record, but of private loss. Over time, the Pentagon attack has become a symbol of the broader uncertainties surrounding September 11th. The questions about what happened, what was seen, what was recorded, and what was left unexplained reflect the larger search for understanding that has followed the events of that day. The debate over Flight 77 and the Pentagon is not only about the details of the attack, but about the ways in which people seek answers when faced with tragedy and confusion. As the discussion around the Pentagon's attack continues, attention often shifts to another site from that morning, one that left a different kind of mystery. In a quiet field outside Shanksville, Pennsylvania, the story of Flight 93 would raise its own set of questions, centered on what was found, what was missing, and what those details might mean. The Shanksville crash, a missing plane. The crash of Flight 93 in rural Pennsylvania stands out both for the courage attributed to its passengers and for the unusual details that have kept people questioning what really happened. At 10:03 a.m., the Boeing 757 went down in a quiet field near Shanksville, leaving a scar on the landscape and a story that is now deeply woven into the memory of September 11th. The official account is one of selflessness and bravery. Passengers and crew, learning of the other attacks, took a vote and decided to fight back against the hijackers. Their resistance, captured in the cockpit voice recorder, is credited with stopping the plane from reaching its likely target in Washington, D.C., either the White House or the Capitol. The narrative is powerful, painting those on board as heroes who changed the course of history in their final moments. The cockpit voice recorder provides a window into those last minutes. It records the chaos and determination inside the cabin as passengers, aware of the stakes, attempt to storm the cockpit. Shouts, banging, and the sounds of a struggle fill the tape. Officials say that as the passengers broke through the cockpit door, the hijackers responded by nosediving the plane, ending the standoff in a violent crash. The government's summary is clear. The passengers' actions prevented another devastating attack, sacrificing themselves but saving countless others. However, the crash site itself quickly became the focus of skepticism. Early media reports and photographs showed a shallow crater in the field, with surprisingly little visible debris. Unlike other air disasters, there were no large sections of fuselage, wings, or tail scattered around. The impact zone seemed oddly empty for a jetliner of that size. Officials explained that the plane hit the ground at a steep angle and high speed, causing most of the aircraft to fragment and bury itself in the soft earth. Some debris, including an engine and landing gear, was found at the site, but the overall lack of recognizable wreckage left some observers uneasy. Eyewitness accounts from the area added to the uncertainty. Some locals described seeing a large plane flying low, followed by a tremendous explosion. Others, though, reported hearing unusual noises or seeing smaller objects in the sky around the same time. These differences in the accounts have been seized upon by those who question the official story, suggesting that something about the event does not add up. The absence of typical crash debris, combined with these conflicting reports, has led to speculation about what actually happened in those final moments. One of the most persistent alternative theories is that Flight 93 was shot down by a military jet. Early on September 11th, fighter planes were scrambled to intercept hijacked aircraft, and some believe that the military may have brought down Flight 93 to prevent it from reaching its target. Supporters of this theory point to the wide distribution of debris, with some lighter pieces found miles from the main crash site, as possible evidence of an in-air breakup. They also mention statements made by officials that seem to hint at a shoot-down, though these were later clarified or retracted. The official response remains that no military aircraft were close enough to intercept Flight 93 before it crashed, and that all available evidence supports the story of a struggle in the cockpit leading to the crash. Another, more fringe, theory suggests that the plane seen crashing in Shanksville was not Flight 93 at all. Proponents of this idea claim that the real plane was diverted elsewhere and replaced by another object, perhaps a drone or missile. To cover up what actually happened, they focus on the limited amount of wreckage, the lack of large identifiable pieces, and the eyewitness reports of unusual aerial activity. This theory finds little support among experts, as investigators recovered parts of the plane, personal belongings, and human remains from the site. DNA testing confirmed the identities of those on board, and the cockpit voice recorder matched the timeline and details described by the passengers' families. Crash investigators and engineers have provided explanations for the unusual appearance of the site. They note that the near vertical angle of impact and the high speed would have caused the plane to break apart violently, with much of the wreckage driven deep into the ground. The soft soil of the field absorbed much of the force, pulling debris below the surface. While this kind of crash is rare, it is not without precedent, and similar impact patterns have been seen in other high-speed crashes. The recovery of the flight data recorder, cockpit voice recorder, and personal effects supports the official account. The story of Flight 93 is not just about technical details or physical evidence. The narrative of resistance and sacrifice has become a central part of how the day is remembered. The voice recordings, though only heard by investigators and family members, have been described as haunting and powerful. Passengers are said to have called loved ones, sharing their intentions and saying goodbye. Their decision to act, using whatever means they had, transformed the flight into a symbol of courage. This has made questioning the official story emotionally charged, as it touches on a narrative that many find deeply meaningful. Still, the lack of visible wreckage and the scattered debris remain points of contention. Some who visit the site are struck by how little remains above ground, fueling doubts about whether the full truth has been told. The differences in eyewitness accounts, while not uncommon in traumatic events, give skeptics reasons to keep asking questions. For others, the official explanations, supported by forensic evidence and the sequence of events recorded on tape, are enough to settle the matter. The Shanksville crash site today is a place of quiet reflection. It serves as both a memorial to those who lost their lives and a reminder of the confusion and chaos of that day. Visitors come to honor the bravery of the passengers and to consider the choices made in those final moments. The open field stands in sharp contrast to the violence of the crash, offering a space for contemplation. Yet for some, it is also a place where questions linger and where the line between fact and speculation remains blurred. As time passes, the story of Flight 93 continues to be revisited, both as an example of heroism and as a source of unresolved questions. The official narrative is detailed and supported by evidence, but the mysteries surrounding the crash site and the final moments of the flight ensure that debate continues. The events in Shanksville are now part of a larger pattern, one where questions about what was known, what was missed, and what might have been ignored are never far from the surface. What happened in that Pennsylvania field is only one piece of a much larger puzzle. The search for answers about that day often turns from the physical evidence on the ground to the information that circulated in the days, weeks, and months before the attacks. The question of whether anyone saw the disaster coming and what warnings might have been missed or dismissed continues to fuel discussion and doubt. Warnings ignored, foreknowledge of 9/11. Long before the morning of September 11, 2001, there were signals, alerts, and warnings circulating among intelligence agencies and government officials. The question of whether these warnings were simply overlooked or intentionally set aside forms the heart of the debate around foreknowledge of the attacks. This topic has led many to examine what information was available, how it was handled, and whether the failures were due to incompetence, miscommunication, or something more deliberate. In the months leading up to 9/11, several international intelligence agencies, including those in Germany, France, Russia, and Israel, are reported to have issued warnings to the United States about a potential Al-Qaeda operation. Some of these warnings were remarkably specific, with references to hijackings and the use of planes as weapons. One of the most discussed examples is the warning reportedly delivered by Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, in late August 2001. This was not the only alert. There were memos from other agencies, and perhaps most notably, the August 6, 2001 presidential daily briefing titled "Bin Laden Determined to Strike in US." This document reached President George W. Bush and outlined the possibility of terrorist attacks involving hijacked airplanes. The administration later described the briefing as non-specific, more a historical overview than a direct warning, and not actionable intelligence. Still, in hindsight, many have questioned how such a pointed alert failed to prompt stronger preventive measures. The issue of missed or ignored warnings is not limited to foreign intelligence. Within the United States, agencies such as the FBI and CIA reportedly gathered bits of information that, had they been combined, might have revealed the plot. There were reports of suspicious flight training activities by foreign nationals, unusual patterns of behavior, and even direct tips from informants. Yet, bureaucratic barriers, lack of information sharing, and a general underestimation of Al-Qaeda's capabilities meant these clues were not pieced together in time. The official story points to a failure of imagination and coordination, but for some, the pattern looks more like a systematic dismissal of red flags. Adding to the uncertainty is the unusual financial activity observed in the days before the attacks. In the week leading up to September 11th, trading volumes for put options on United Airlines and American Airlines stocks surged to levels far above normal. A put option is a financial bet that a stock's price will fall. The spike in these bets, particularly on the airlines involved in the attacks, raised suspicions that someone might have had advance knowledge. The 9/11 Commission investigated these trades and concluded they were coincidental, not connected to anyone with foreknowledge of the attacks. Despite this, the timing and scale of the activity remain a focal point for those who suspect a deeper conspiracy. The idea that someone could profit from tragedy is disturbing, and the lack of a clear explanation keeps the speculation alive. Questions about the US military's response on the morning of 9/11 have also fueled suspicions. NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, is responsible for defending American airspace. On September 11th, NORAD's response was delayed and confused. One contributing factor, according to official reports, was that the hijackers turned off the plane's transponders, making them harder to track. However, critics argue that military radar systems should have been able to follow the flights regardless. There is also the matter of training exercises. On the very morning of the attacks, NORAD was running Vigilant Guardian, an exercise simulating hijacked aircraft. Some air traffic controllers and military personnel have described initial confusion over whether the real-world events were part of the drill. Officially, NORAD denies that the exercise hampered their response, attributing the delays to the unexpected nature of the attack and communication problems. For skeptics, though, the overlap between the drills and the real attacks is troubling, suggesting the possibility of a deliberate distraction. Theories about deliberate inaction are not limited to NORAD. The broader intelligence community has faced criticism for what some see as a pattern of disregarded warnings. One historical example is Operation Bojinka, a 1995 plot uncovered in the Philippines that involved plans to hijack airliners and use them as weapons. Though that plot was foiled, its details were shared with US authorities. The similarities to the events of 2001 have led many to ask why the potential for such an attack was not taken more seriously. Theories range from bureaucratic inertia to more controversial claims that elements within the government allowed the attacks to happen, either to justify military action abroad or to expand domestic surveillance powers. After September 11th, the rapid passage of the Patriot Act, legislation that dramatically increased government surveillance and law enforcement powers, became another point of suspicion. Critics argue that the speed and scope of the law's rollout suggest it may have been prepared in advance, waiting for a crisis to make its passage possible. The Project for the New American Century, a think tank influential in the Bush administration, published a report in 2000 stating that the transformation of the US military would require a catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. For some, this statement reads as more than just strategic planning. It seems to foreshadow the very events that followed. The 9/11 Commission report addressed many of these issues, concluding that the failures leading up to the attacks were due to organizational problems, poor communication, and a lack of imagination regarding the threat posed by Al-Qaeda. The report's tone is one of surprise and regret, emphasizing that no one expected such an attack. Yet, for many, the explanations leave gaps. Why wasn't the Bin Laden determined to strike in US? Briefing treated as an urgent call to action? Why weren't fighter jets scrambled sooner? Why do questions about trading activity and foreign intelligence warnings continue to linger, even after years of official investigation? Physical evidence has also played a role in fueling doubts. The recovery of hijacker passports from the rubble, reportedly undamaged and found near the World Trade Center, has struck many as improbable, while officials insist that such finds are not unusual in disasters. Critics argue that the survival of paper documents in an environment that destroyed massive steel beams is difficult to accept. These details, combined with the broader pattern of ignored warnings, contribute to the sense that the full story has not been told. For those who accept the official explanations, the narrative is one of a nation caught off guard by a sophisticated enemy, with failures rooted in bureaucracy and miscommunication rather than malice. For others, the pattern of missed opportunities, the speed of post-attack policy changes, and the presence of unexplained anomalies point to something more intentional. The debate continues, shaped by a mix of documented facts, unanswered questions, and the persistent feeling that crucial information remains just out of reach. At the heart of this discussion is the issue of trust. Trust in institutions, in official narratives, and in the ability of governments to tell the truth about events that shape history. The search for answers about foreknowledge and ignored warnings is not just about the past, it's about how societies respond to crisis and how narratives are constructed in the aftermath. Whether the failures were accidental or intentional, the consequences have been profound, reshaping policy, security, and public perception in ways that continue to echo today. As we look at the events that followed September 11th, questions about intent and motive come to the forefront. The speed with which new policies were adopted, the framing of the attacks in public discourse, and the immediate push for military action all suggest that the aftermath of 9/11 was more than just a reaction to tragedy. The debate about whether the attacks were simply a surprise or something more calculated continues to shape how we remember that day and its impact on the world. The new Pearl Harbor, government complicity. In the aftermath of the September 11th of attacks, a persistent question emerged from skeptics and researchers. Was the tragedy simply an unprecedented terrorist act, or was it something more, an event allowed or even engineered to advance hidden agendas? This idea, often called the New Pearl Harbor theory, centers on the possibility of government complicity. At the core of this argument is a single phrase from a 2000 report by the Project for the New American Century, PNAC, a think tank made up of prominent neoconservatives. The report, titled Rebuilding America's Defenses, argued for a stronger US military presence around the globe and suggested that such a transformation would likely be slow, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. For many who question the official story, this line stands out as more than a policy observation. It is read as a signal, a clue that those in power, were aware that a major crisis could accelerate their plans. The fact that just a year later, the United States experienced a shocking attack that led to sweeping changes in foreign and domestic policy has fueled ongoing speculation. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the rapid passage of the Patriot Act, and the shift in public attitudes towards security and surveillance are often cited as evidence that the attacks served a purpose beyond immediate response. The speed and scope of the government's reaction after 9/11 became a major point of suspicion. The Patriot Act, a complex and far-reaching piece of legislation, was introduced and signed into law within weeks of the attacks. It greatly expanded surveillance powers for law enforcement, allowing for broad monitoring of communications, financial transactions, and personal records. Critics note how quickly the act moved through Congress with little debate, and suggest that its size and detail indicate it may have been prepared in advance. For those who believe in the new Pearl Harbor theory, the Patriot Act represents not just a response to terror, but a pre-planned expansion of government control, with 9/11 as the catalyst. Another element that draws attention is the role of key government officials during the attacks. Then Vice President Dick Cheney, for example, was in the Presidential Emergency Operations Center beneath the White House on the morning of September 11th. From this secure bunker, he reportedly issued critical orders, including the authorization to shoot down commercial aircraft that did not comply with instructions. The timing and nature of these orders have been debated, with some suggesting that confusion and delays in the response may have been intentional rather than accidental. The presence of military exercises, such as Vigilant Guardian, a drill simulating hijacked planes, only added to the complexity. Some argue that the coincidence of these drills with the real-world attacks created confusion and slowed the military's ability to respond, while others see it as an unfortunate overlap rather than a sign of conspiracy. Skeptics also point to the rapid shift in foreign policy following the attacks. The invasion of Afghanistan began less than a month after 9/11, with the goal of dismantling Al-Qaeda and removing the Taliban from power. Soon after, attention turned to Iraq, with claims that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction and posed a threat to the United States. These claims, later found to be unsupported, were enough to justify a second war. Critics argued that the momentum for military action was already in place, and that 9/11 provided the necessary public support and political cover to pursue it. The speed with which these wars were launched, and the long-term consequences that followed, are seen as evidence that the attacks fit into a broader strategic plan. Historical context is often used to bolster these suspicions. The 1962 Operation Northwoods proposal, for example, is frequently cited by those who question the limits of government action. In that plan, US military leaders suggested staging false flag attacks on American soil, including hijackings and bombings, to justify a war against Cuba. Although the plan was never carried out, its existence demonstrates that such ideas have been considered at the highest levels. For some, this precedent makes the idea of a government-orchestrated attack in 2001 seem less far-fetched. The emotional impact of 9/11 on the American public is another piece of the puzzle. In the days and weeks after the attacks, images of the burning towers and the devastation at the Pentagon were broadcast non-stop, creating an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. This environment, some argue, made it easier for leaders to implement sweeping changes with little resistance. The willingness of the public to accept increased surveillance, expanded police powers, and military action abroad is often seen as a result of this psychological shock. Critics suggest that fear was used as a tool to shape opinion and clear the way for policies that might otherwise have faced significant opposition. Theories about government complicity often rely on patterns and timing rather than direct evidence. The close sequence of events, the attacks, the introduction of the Patriot Act, the launch of wars, creates a narrative that for some feels too coordinated to be coincidence. The PNAC report's reference to a new Pearl Harbor, the existence of plans like Operation Northwoods, and the rapid legislative and military responses are woven together into a story that suggests intent. For others, these connections are circumstantial, the result of a government and society reacting to an unprecedented crisis. Officials have consistently denied any suggestion of foreknowledge or complicity. Multiple investigations, including the 9/11 Commission report, concluded that the attacks were the result of failures in intelligence and coordination, not deliberate planning or allowance. The Bush administration and others involved have maintained that they were caught off guard, and that their actions were driven by the need to respond to an unexpected and catastrophic event. The scale and complexity of the attacks, they argue, overwhelmed existing systems and exposed vulnerabilities that had not been fully recognized. Despite these assurances, doubts remain. The rapid identification of the hijackers, the consistent narrative presented by officials and the media, and the uniformity of the early coverage have raised questions about how the story was shaped and controlled. Some critics argue that the speed with which suspects were named and the lack of alternative viewpoints in mainstream coverage suggest a level of coordination not easily explained by chaos alone. The idea that the media played a role in reinforcing the official story and in suppressing dissent or alternative theories is a recurring theme among those who question the narrative. The aftermath of 9/11 brought lasting changes to American society and the world. The expansion of surveillance, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and the new sense of vulnerability all shaped the years that followed. For many, these outcomes are enough to justify continued scrutiny of how and why the attacks happened, and whether they were simply seized upon by those in power or were part of a broader plan. The debate over government complicity remains unresolved, fueled by unanswered questions, historical precedents, and the ways in which crisis can reshape societies. As these questions linger, attention often turns to the role of information itself, how stories are told, how facts are presented, and how public understanding is shaped in the immediate aftermath of tragedy. The way the events of September 11th were reported, the speed of the narrative's formation, and the influence of media coverage have become central to understanding not just what happened, but how it was understood by millions around the world. The media's role shaping the narrative. News organizations found themselves at the center of a storm on September 11th, 2001, as the world looked to them for answers. In the space of a few hours, television screens filled with images of destruction, while anchors and experts worked to piece together the story in real time. The media's role in shaping how the public understood those events became as important as the facts themselves. The speed certainty, and repetition with which information was presented would come to define not only the first days after the attacks, but the way 9/11 would be remembered for decades. Almost immediately, major networks and newspapers began to share names, photographs, and detailed biographies of the alleged hijackers. By the evening of September 11th, the FBI had released a list of 19 suspects, complete with their backgrounds and supposed connections to Al-Qaeda. For many, this seemed like an incredible feat of investigative work, considering the chaos and confusion still unfolding at the crash sites. Yet, this rapid identification left some viewers uneasy. How, they wondered, could such a complex web of identities and motives be untangled so quickly, especially when so many details about the day remained unclear? This sense of unease deepened as the narrative solidified. The story of Al-Qaeda operatives training in the United States, entering the country on carefully planned visas, and executing a coordinated attack was presented with remarkable confidence. The official explanation was that intelligence agencies had already been monitoring some of these individuals, particularly Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, who had appeared on watch lists. Still, the timing and certainty with which the story was shared led critics to question whether the narrative was being shaped as much as it was being discovered. The impact of the media's visual storytelling cannot be overstated. Repeated footage of the planes striking the towers, the billowing smoke, and the eventual collapse played on a loop for days. These images became etched into the collective memory, reinforcing a particular version of events before alternative explanations could even surface. The repetition created a sense of inevitability, making it harder for the public to imagine that anything other than the official account could be true. The emotional power of these visuals, combined with the urgency of the reporting, made it difficult for viewers to step back and question the bigger picture. Coverage focused heavily on the human toll, the victims, the first responders, and the families left behind. This emphasis, while natural in the aftermath of tragedy, also had the effect of narrowing the conversation. Stories that questioned how the attacks were possible or why security failures had occurred were often sidelined. Instead, the narrative centered on unity, patriotism, and the need for a decisive response. In this environment, skepticism was sometimes met with accusations of insensitivity or even disloyalty, making it challenging for dissenting voices to be heard. One of the most controversial aspects of the media's role was its handling of physical evidence, especially at sites like the Pentagon. After the crash of Flight 77, officials quickly collected security camera footage from nearby businesses, including a gas station and a hotel. Only a few frames were eventually released to the public, showing a blurry object and an explosion, but offering little clarity. The lack of more comprehensive footage fueled suspicion. Critics asked why, with so many cameras trained on one of the world's most secure buildings, there was not a single clear image of the plane. The government's explanation was that most footage was either redundant or of poor quality. However, the decision to withhold so much visual evidence only deepened doubts and allowed speculation to flourish. The media's response to these gaps in evidence was often to echo official statements or to downplay the significance of missing information. News outlets rarely pressed for additional footage or questioned the reasons for its secrecy. Instead, they focused on the stories and images that supported the established narrative. This approach led some to accuse the media of acting as a gatekeeper, filtering out uncomfortable questions and reinforcing a single version of events. Those who raised doubts were frequently labeled as conspiracy theorists, and their concerns were either ignored or dismissed as fringe ideas. The speed with which blame was assigned and the story was constructed also drew criticism. The public was told, almost immediately, not only who was responsible, but how and why the attacks had taken place. This certainty stood in stark contrast to the confusion and uncertainty that marked the day itself. Skeptics pointed out that the release of detailed information about the hijackers' travel histories, financial records, and training seemed implausibly fast. They wondered whether the story had been prepared in advance, or whether officials were simply eager to provide answers that would help the nation make sense of the tragedy. As the days turned into weeks, the 24-hour news cycle kept the attacks at the forefront of public consciousness. Continuous coverage, from live reports at Ground Zero to interviews with survivors, ensured that the official narrative was repeated and reinforced. Emotional stories dominated the airwaves, making it difficult for viewers to focus on the technical details or inconsistencies that might have warranted deeper investigation. The result was a kind of narrative momentum in which questioning the story felt not only difficult but almost inappropriate. This atmosphere made it challenging for alternative perspectives to gain traction. Interviews with skeptics or critics of the official account were rare, and when they did occur, they were often framed with disclaimers or counterpoints from experts who reinforced the mainstream view. This created the impression of consensus, even as questions lingered in the background. The line between responsible journalism and narrative control became blurred, as the need for order and reassurance took precedence over open inquiry. Some argue that this was less a matter of deliberate manipulation and more a reflection of the pressures facing news organizations in a crisis. Reporters and producers, like everyone else, were struggling to make sense of unprecedented events. In such moments, the instinct is often to seek clarity and reassurance, both for the audience and for themselves. The government provided answers, and the media, eager to inform and comfort the public, repeated them. The complexity of the situation, combined with the emotional weight of the tragedy, left little room for ambiguity. Yet, the effect of this approach was to create a version of 9/11 that left little space for doubt. The speed, certainty, and emotional intensity of the coverage meant that alternative explanations were crowded out before they could be fully considered. Over time, this has contributed to a lingering sense of mistrust, as those who question the official story feel their concerns were never given a fair hearing. The question of transparency remains at the heart of these debates. The withholding of evidence, the marginalization of dissenting voices, and the focus on a single narrative have all contributed to an environment in which speculation thrives. For some, this is evidence of a deliberate effort to control public perception. For others, it is simply the result of a media system struggling to cope with the demands of a national emergency. What is clear is that the media's handling of 9/11 shaped not only how the events were understood at the time, but how they continue to be remembered and debated. The choices made in those first hours and days, what to show, what to say, what to question, set the boundaries for public discussion. As new information emerges and old questions resurface, the legacy of that coverage continues to influence the search for answers. In the years since, the space left by unanswered questions and unexplored angles has given rise to a wide range of alternative theories. Some of these ideas stay close to the facts, while others venture into more speculative territory. The persistence of these theories and the reasons they endure point to the powerful role that uncertainty and curiosity play in shaping our understanding of history. As we move further from the events of that day, the boundary between what is known, what is believed, and what is imagined becomes ever more difficult to define. Fringe theories beyond the mainstream. In the aftermath of 9/11, as official explanations settled into the public consciousness, a variety of alternative ideas began to circulate, some of them venturing well beyond the boundaries of mainstream skepticism. These so-called fringe theories, often discussed in online forums and alternative media, challenge not just the details of what happened, but the very nature of the evidence itself. One of the most persistent of these theories concerns what actually struck the Pentagon. Some claim it wasn't American Airlines Flight 77, but rather a missile or an unmanned drone. Supporters of this idea point to the size and shape of the impact hole, arguing that it seems too small for a Boeing 757. They note the limited amount of visible airplane debris in the photos released to the public, and the lack of clear surveillance footage showing the moment of impact. To them, these gaps suggest that something smaller and faster, possibly a military device, was responsible. Even though forensic teams recovered parts of the plane, including landing gear and engine components, and identified remains of passengers through DNA analysis, those who support the missile or drone theory remain unconvinced. The absence of widely released high-quality video footage continues to fuel their doubts. Another idea that occupies the outer edges of 9/11 speculation is the no planes theory. According to this view, the planes seen striking the Twin Towers in videos and live broadcasts were not real at all. Instead, believers argue the footage was fabricated or digitally manipulated. They examine video frames for inconsistencies, such as odd lighting, strange shadows, or what they interpret as glitches in the motion of the aircraft. Some suggest that the way the planes appear to slice so cleanly into the towers defies the expected physics, while others point to supposed discrepancies in eyewitness accounts. Critics of this theory argue that it misinterprets video compression artifacts and camera limitations. They also highlight the overwhelming number of witnesses who saw the planes with their own eyes from the streets of New York. Despite this, the no planes theory continues to find an audience in online spaces where skepticism of the official story runs deep. A related, even more speculative idea is the claim that the planes were holograms, projected into the sky to fool both live observers and television viewers. This theory suggests that advanced projection technology was used to create the illusion of crashing airliners, while pre-planted explosives inside the towers caused the actual destruction. There is no credible evidence to support this scenario, and it is rejected by experts in both physics and video technology. Still, it persists as an example of how far some are willing to go in questioning the accepted version of events. Perhaps the most elaborate of all 9/11 fringe theories is the claim that directed energy weapons were used to bring down the Twin Towers. Proponents suggest that some form of advanced secret technology capable of emitting powerful beams of energy caused the buildings to collapse in such a rapid and symmetrical fashion. They point to the fine dust, melted steel, and unusual debris patterns as evidence that conventional fires and structural damage could not have been solely responsible. Some cite reports of cars with scorched exteriors blocks away from ground zero, or steel beams twisted in ways they believe are inconsistent with fire alone. Scientists and engineers, however, have repeatedly explained that the evidence is consistent with the known effects of intense fires, structural weakening, and the immense energy released by the collapse itself. No physical traces of directed energy weapons have ever been found at the site. These fringe theories are often dismissed by experts, but their appeal can be traced to deeper psychological and social factors. For many, the official story of 9/11 is difficult to accept because it suggests that a small group of individuals, armed with little more than box cutters and flight training, could inflict such catastrophic damage on some of the world's most secure sites. The scale of the tragedy, combined with the sense of vulnerability it created, left many people searching for explanations that offered more control or intent. In this context, theories involving advanced technology, secret weapons, or elaborate deceptions can seem more satisfying than the idea of random chance or bureaucratic failure. Psychologists who study conspiracy beliefs note that major traumatic events often give rise to alternative explanations. When people feel powerless or uncertain, they are more likely to seek patterns and meaning, even if those patterns are not supported by evidence. Fringe theories offer a sense of order, suggesting that someone, somewhere, was in control. In a way, believing in a hidden plan or advanced technology can be less frightening than accepting that chaos and human error played such a large role in shaping history. The persistence of these theories also reflects a broader mistrust in institutions, whether government, media, or science. When official explanations leave questions unanswered, or when authorities restrict access to information, suspicion grows. The rapid cleanup of Ground Zero, the limited release of surveillance footage, and the sometimes contradictory statements from officials have all contributed to an environment where speculation thrives. In online communities, these doubts are amplified and reinforced, creating echo chambers where alternative ideas are discussed and refined, often without the challenge of opposing viewpoints. Fringe theories can have real consequences for how history is understood. When alternative explanations take hold, they can erode confidence in the shared record of events. Some people may begin to doubt not only the details of 9/11, but the reliability of official information more generally. This skepticism can spill over into other areas, affecting trust in science, medicine, and public policy. In extreme cases, it can lead to the rejection of well-established facts in favor of more sensational or comforting narratives. At the same time, the act of questioning official accounts is not inherently negative. Critical thinking and skepticism are essential tools for understanding complex events, especially when the stakes are high. History is full of examples where official stories were later revised or corrected. However, the difference lies in the approach. Productive skepticism is grounded in evidence, open inquiry, and a willingness to revise beliefs in light of new information. Fringe theories, by contrast, often rely on speculation, selective use of facts, and a tendency to dismiss contradictory evidence as part of a cover-up. The emotional impact of 9/11 cannot be separated from the way these theories take root. For those who experience the attacks, either directly or through the media, the desire for answers is powerful. The search for meaning in the face of tragedy is a natural human response. When the official narrative feels incomplete or unsatisfying, people may turn to alternative explanations that promise to fill in the gaps. These stories can provide a sense of closure or even hope, suggesting that the world is not as random or dangerous as it might seem. Despite their lack of evidence, fringe theories about 9/11 continue to circulate and evolve. They reflect a need to understand, to question, and to find order in chaos. They also serve as a reminder of the importance of transparency, open communication, and careful investigation, qualities that are essential for building trust in the aftermath of crisis. While most of these theories do not withstand scrutiny, their existence highlights the challenges that arise when information is incomplete or withheld. The conclusion of the 9/11 story is far from simple. The attacks claimed 2,977 lives and left thousands more injured, changing the course of history in ways that still affect us today. The consequences have touched international relations, security policies, and the daily lives of people around the world. For some, the official explanations offer a sense of closure, while for others, the lingering questions and unresolved details keep the debate alive. The search for understanding, whether through investigation, discussion, or personal reflection, remains ongoing. As you think about what you've heard, consider where your own questions lead. The story of 9/11, marked by both memory and uncertainty, continues to invite reflection and conversation.